Welcome to our channel. Today we're exploring the iconostasis at St. Ephraim's Orthodox Parish in Cambridge and the remarkable artist behind it, Aidan Hart. Aidan was born in England in 1957 and grew up in New Zealand. After completing a degree in English literature and a teaching diploma, he initially worked as a sculptor. However, in 1983, Aidan embraced his calling by joining the Orthodox Church and returning to England to focus on iconography. With a deep commitment to his faith, Aidan spent years refining his skills in various mediums: egg tempera, fresco, mosaic, and wood carving. His journey also included 2 years as a monk on Mount Athos and 6 years as a hermit in Shropshire, experiences that profoundly shaped his artistic vision. At St. Ephraim's, Aidan's artistry shines through the carefully crafted iconostasis, a vital element in Orthodox worship. Each icon tells a story, inviting the faithful to engage in deeper spiritual experience. Join us as we delve into Aidan Hart's journey, his creative process, and the significance of the iconostasis at St. Ephraim's. If you are inspired by art and spirituality, like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more content.
Well, if I've got to sort of cast my mind back a bit, I've known him for a long time, at least 23 years, I think. I used to go to Cambridge, I had friends there, and so we knew of each other. And I think he just said, we need an icon screen. He gave the situation. It's got to be put away at the end of the service because the Anglican parish needing it. I'd had experience of designing portable icon screens that could remain up, but had to be taken down quickly if you had to. And then those which had to be removed every time, but they didn't have many funds. So I've designed one, for example, for the American Naval Base in Naples. So these had to be removed, but in fact, I can say them most of the time, but they were very different. They were just sort of wooden stands, which then could be moved away. But in this particular case, we really wanted it to look permanent, even though it could be moved. So it was a real challenge. So that's basically the mandate, that he wanted something that fitted, obviously, with the church. He wanted something that could be moved by old ladies. You didn't have to have muscly weightlifters to lift 2 tons of icon screen. And also he wanted me to do the icon. So they're the 3 things he told me. Yeah, and then I visited, we talked about it, and then I sort of told him the process. I'd come up with some designs and then get feedback from him, and we'd go by stages. Be hands-off, really. I think he sort of trusted me from past work. I think I asked him if there was any particular emphasis in the icons that he wanted. There are many icons of the Mother of God, for example. I think I mentioned I thought Our Lady of the Sign would be good because this emphasizes the divinity of Christ, but also his humanity. Others where the tender loving kindness, it's much more the humanity. And I felt in our age, especially in a place like Cambridge, you've got brainy people. In a sense, you've got to confront that braininess with something that's beyond what the rational faculty can comprehend. And I think there's a great deal of symbolism, which is more overt in Our Lady of the Sign type. So I think I suggested that and he agreed. But pretty hands-off, really. I always want to have a dialogue, but in this particular case, rather than the commissioner saying what they wanted precisely, I took the initiative and then shared it with him, and we might have fine-tuned a few things, but basically he was happy with what I came up with.
Yeah. Oh, so it was your idea to include St. Clement as well because of the church?
Oh, well, no, that was his, I think, yeah. That was just taken for granted that being the patron of the church, we would include him.
Yeah, I think it's nice, yeah, that we have that connection, yeah.
I think it's a general principle, both spiritually and in liturgical art. Whatever we do must be incarnational in the place. So architecturally, to fit in with that place, but also you've got this long history, Anglican history of being dedicated to St. Clement. So you just can't come along and pretend that history doesn't exist. So I think it's really important that that there is this sense of authentic incarnation in place and time. If there's something lacking, then you adjust it, but you don't just sort of completely wipe out the past and drop down from here to something completely new. So having St. Clement was a sort of symbol of continuity as well as something that was new. Yeah, in this particular project, the first thing was the actual structure of the screen. So I looked at what was there, and there was ironwork there, especially that screen in front. And because it had to be moved, I figured that iron would actually be better than wood, because when you have wooden panels, that if they're going to be moved easily, it had to be some sort of hinging system. And we didn't have storage, so I knew the system had to be hinged and then moved against the wall. And I could see there'd be problems with wood for that. So just structurally, iron seemed better. Unfortunately, there was ironwork there. So then I went around studying good ironwork. It was mainly Victorian, but also took photographs of early Saxon work. So I wanted to draw on that. The icon of St. Clement was actually more drawn from the early Roman period. So I looked at early Roman iconography, Ravenna in Italy. Though there are mosaics from Ravenna, I drew from those. Also, I think drew ideas from mosaics in Palermo in Sicily. So there are sort of Western, well, Byzantine Western iconography. Probably the Palermo work was done by Byzantine mosaicists, probably working with and training locals. And then the scroll designs, they were in part inspired by actually a Victorian work in Lichfield Cathedral, I think it is, or is it Hereford? There was quite a well-known ironworker. So I got ideas from that. If I do an icon of a Saxon saint or Celtic saint, I would like to include elements like I've done one of St. Chad. So I've actually got, he's holding the gospel cover of St. Chad's Bible, which is in Lichfield. So yeah, it's part of this thing of Pentecost, really. You speak the language of the people that are around you. You don't say you all got to learn Latin and Greek. You speak their language. So that's the case visually as well as audibly. I studied what was there, I took photographs, and I noticed the color system of the wooden beam across the top and the colors there. So, and I thought to make the iron warmer, I would polychrome it, paint it. I always like to be true to the materials. So the kind of color system, try to sort of be true to the fact that it's iron. So I looked at work there. And then the main thing that took the time was actually designing it so it worked. It was really quite a complicated thing. The design's quite heavy. I had to figure out how to hinge it. On the other hand, make it still look good. So I looked as though it wasn't a mobile screen. So I did a lot of quite detailed drawings. So I've got a timesheet somewhere of how long it all took. But I think the actual design might have taken about three weeks full-time work. And then I worked with an ironworker friend, and he suggested a few alterations. And some things I thought, well, I think it's going to work, but we might have to do some adjustments as we're making it. I think there's one adjustment. The main thing about the arch, I initially had the arch as one piece, which then sort of hinged off. But in the end, we had the arch attached to the two side parts and actually attached at the top. So that was a major change, which worked a lot better than my original idea. But I realized there'd be a lot of stress on the wall hinges. So I remember I was quite adamant about this particular system I designed, and my ironworker friend said, oh no, we've got to have this other more traditional way. But I said, well, the floor's not quite flat. You've got to have a system where you can adjust everything so it's perfectly even. So I had to sort of be like a devil's advocate, think of all the things that could go wrong and how to ensure that the design allowed us to be flexible, because old buildings are never perfect. So nothing's at right angles. So I had to try to think ahead all the time and how the rollers would go in the tile floors. I knew the floors weren't going to be entirely flat. So a lot of stress involved, mental stress, thinking of all the things that could go wrong and ensuring that they were covered. Fortunately, it worked.
Sounds like a lot of structural engineering,
Oh, it was. Yeah. Well, fortunately, there was an Anglican member of the parish who was a civil engineer, and he did some structural estimation.
That's Barry, isn't it?
Barry, that's right. Yeah. So it was great to have that. I'm guessing about 3 weeks to do the design. My ironworker did the work on and off over a long period of time. I think he struggled with it, and he'd underpriced already. His initial price was too low. So I told him, you can't do it for that. You've got to put it up. But he'd stood underpriced. So that created quite a bit of stress as well, because I was sort of the middleman, and he kept stopping because he ran out of money, and then he'd gone over the budget. So it took longer than it should have. Really, father was really patient with all that. Um, so it's difficult to say, really, in terms of hours of the screen. It should have probably taken 2 months full-time work. I think it took longer than that, was all the stops and starts. And the icons, I suppose, the design, there are basically five. If you count the royal doors as sort of two, there are 6 icons. So I suppose it was about 12, 3 or 4 months to do those. So in terms of man hours, you could say about 8 months of work, perhaps. Yeah.
Still see that. So it's amazing that you managed to come up with a system to work around all these things. And yeah, as you said, with there's a lack of right angles everywhere. I can imagine that would be quite tough for an engineer to work with.
But I enjoy challenges. Often people say, well, sometimes people say, isn't a commission limiting? But that's precisely what makes you do things you wouldn't do normally.
Mm.
So I think the limitations left and right could have forced you to go up and down, and it forces you to go into depth. I think it's a mistake of modern art. You can do anything you want, and people get completely lost, they're without parameters, without a sense of service of a particular situation. Then I think you're prey to the limitations of your ego, which is interesting about tradition, really. Yeah, tradition is actually far more creative than do whatever you want. You're chained to yourself with that do whatever you want philosophy.
So you also mentioned about the Lichfield pulpit being an inspiration. And I did have a look at this, and I can definitely see the inspiration there, specifically in colors and why was it specifically the Lichfield Cathedral that you went towards and not, say, another cathedral?
Yeah. Well, I'd collected photographs for years of ironwork, and I got some fantastic books on ironwork. I'd always been very interested in it and done some myself. My first attempt at ironwork was when I was at Mount Athos. I was a novice monk for a number of years, and 2 years at Aveyron Monastery. And the abbot commissioned me to make a casing for the Port Aethysar icon, which is like making a throne for the Queen. I mean, the Port Aethysar icon is the icon of Athos. And that involved me making some wrought iron hangers for the about 10 hanging oil lamps. So I'd always been fascinated by as it were, the alchemy of this hard iron, which becomes soft when you heat it, and the capacity to form it. So that got me really interested in ironwork. So I've been accumulating photographs, and when I visited old cathedrals or museums like the V&A, I took photographs. So it just happened that I was aware of Lichfield because I'd been on a committee there to help design some things for it. And I'd done this icon already of St. Chad. And a number of people had mentioned this, I forget his name, but this famous Victorian iron worker. So I was aware of his work, and I wanted to add polychromy to the iron work at Cambridge to make it more warm. So that just seemed obvious. And it was a nice sort of gentleness. It was rich, but not bearish, the colouring. So, yeah. And I like the idea of the vegetable designs. I think I might have got some of the ideas for design from that as well. So not just the colour, but some of the fold designs. And of course, British people love nature. So I'm a great believer in starting with what people idolise and then make that thing they idolise transparent to lead them to God. So if people idolise in England nature, so okay, I see why you love nature, but you realise that nature is an icon. It's actually it's a love gift. It's an engagement ring sent from the divine lover to you. So I like to start for people who've gotten, instead of saying, oh, it's idolatry, forget that and look to God. I think, okay, let's look at what you love. But don't you realize that this is a message, got a label on it, from God with love? So I wanted to include English love of nature into something that was iconographic to make it transparent.
Yes, I can definitely vouch for that. Especially, I think there are like old Christian Anglo-Saxon poems about trees and how, oh, actually, there's a tree that's even better than the ones that are around here that I can tell you about. All these kinds of things. So yeah, I think there definitely is a love for nature, and there's a parishioner we have called Dr. Elizabeth Theocritoff. You
Oh, I know her
probably
well. Yeah, I've known her a long time. Yeah.
Yes, and she has a book on ecology and how this ties into the love letter that you were kind of speaking about.
Aesthetic, really. I chose roughly colours that were already there. I think from memory, the wooden painted beam along the top. So, and I think something in the wall paintings as well in the altar. Um, so it's a combination of relating to what's there. I've got to remind myself of the colours, actually. I'll just open up a photograph I've got here to remind me. I think also if you want a joyous effect, then you want complementary colours. So I think it's the red and green there, which are complementary. Yeah, so gold, yeah, so red and green are complementary and they sort of intensify one another. I'm just looking at my original design. So yeah, it's partially aesthetic, partially sort of theology of rooting it in the place. I'm just looking at the photograph now of the beam across the top. So that's gold, green, and red. So, you know, yeah. So I couldn't say there's any sort of conscious symbolism really in that particular case.
Brilliant.
I'm sure people read it into it, but
Yes, that's definitely something that maybe that's an Orthodox trait as well.
It's Christmas, isn't it?
Sorry?
It's
Yeah.
Christmas.
Yeah. I suppose, yes, just looking at the gold work along the top beam, and that is a vine of life. You're looking, I'm very interested in how all of life is this union of repetition and particularity. I'm here talking Jonathan's language. So along the top, you've got this repeated logo, but then you've got the variety, and down below as well, this being handmade in part, you've always got variations. So each flower will be a little bit different as it's handmade. So I suppose I have that in mind, that symbolic importance of unity and diversity. Yeah. So I suppose that wouldn't be symbolism in any particular thing there, but that's really the whole theme that I have. And I often tell my students when I'm teaching them, say with garments or faces or anything, nothing should be completely separate from what's around us. So often I talk about creating paddocks in a large terrain. You have a paddock, but there's always got to be a gate so you can go from one paddock to another. So you have these fences, but you never fence each paddock off entirely. There's got to be some means of communication. So you've got unity because they all lead into another, but you've also got distinction. So it's very much something I keep in mind with any form of iconography I do.
That's really interesting because our parish is very diverse, and we combine our diversity in unity. Yes, so it's very nice.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think it's a principle, I suppose it comes from being in the image of the Holy Trinity. The Holy Trinity is three utterly distinct persons, so utterly one at the same time. It's not half and half, it's utterly united, utterly distinct. Yeah.
Yeah, it does remind me of, I think it's John Zizioulas when he talks about relational ontology and being as communion and all these kinds of ideas, I think that you're hinting to. Relational ontology in particular being that, there's no such thing as an individual really. And even in art, I guess, there's nothing individualized there. Everything has to relate to something because we know the identity by the relation, I guess.
Yes.
And yeah, this idea of variation and unity and the one in the many and the many in the one and all these kinds of ideas. It's very interesting. And actually, I hadn't even thought about these kinds of things until you've mentioned it. But yes, there is this sort of pattern at the top, and then you have this kind of variation at the bottom, and it almost does have that kind of leading up to the peak of with the cross in the middle as well. So it does all kind of fit in that way. So yeah, it's brilliant that you mentioned.
I suppose one dominating shape in iconography is the triangle, because relationality is never dual. If it is dual, then it's opposition. You define yourself by not being the other. But when you get three, the two people not like you. So you can't say, I define myself by not being you. This other person's not like you as well. So in iconography, like looking at the icon of the Mother of God there, she's sort of within a triangle. Most busts a sort of in a triangle. And as you say, having the arch in the middle of the cross, there's a triangular movement upwards. So there's a horizontal base symbolizing the created world, but it moves upwards, and the vertical is the divine. So just as each individual only becomes fully human when they're deified, so likewise, liturgical art should have the vertical united to the horizontal. And I suppose also the whole color scheme of the screen is a union of gold, really, and hard iron. So the hard iron is the created, well, the flowers are created, but the gold permeating everything is the divine. So they're distinct, but they're united into one. Good question. Here's the one whose name I'd forgotten. Yes, who made the. Just thinking of ironwork doesn't often come up in commission work. I'm just thinking of other cases. Actually, just yesterday, I received a work from Richard Hillam, who actually made not the screen, but the other works. It was through your church I discovered him. So that's fantastic. So anyway, I've just going to install in London tomorrow, next week, an icon I've done, and that's got two candle holders, which Richard and I designed. So I think subliminally, the work of Skidmore is in the back of my mind now for just about all ironwork that I do. I'm sure it must be an influence on Richard Hillam as well. Yeah, let's wait and see until I get other ironwork, and I'll see if Skidmore's influenced me more. I can't remember actually. I would have if you hadn't. I would have suggested it. I would have even just said we've got to do it that way. I wouldn't have given him a choice basically. So yeah, I can't remember. I think knowing him, he would have wanted it to be fitting to that place, and therefore, by definition, almost Anglo-Saxon. Yeah, but I can't recall if he took the initiative on that or not. But I think we're in completely one mind about that anyway. Well, it's very interesting to know before and after responses to things. I was at a Catholic seminary yesterday. They've, at my suggestion, they've actually started and introduced a whole module for the seminarians on liturgical art. And they're going to visit a church that I recently frescoed, a Catholic church not far away. And I asked the priest if he could have some of the parishioners to say what it was like before this apse was frescoed and what it's like after, how that has affected their worship and affected them personally. So it's always a joy for me to know if something has worked well, spiritually, liturgically. So my question is, in what way has the icon screen enriched your worship together?
I think Andre, you've been fortunate to arrive at the St. Clement's parish when it was already in place, right? But for many years, we used to worship in Westcott House, where the space was open. We had just two icons in front, and then there wasn't any iconostasis. And I think it makes you feel when you walk in that it's a church straight away, especially when on the days when we're allowed to keep it set up in the Orthodox way. It makes a big difference, and you can see people walking in and they immediately realize they're in an Orthodox church. They don't need to ask, what service is it, or is it whereas I think before, because we set up and we have to pack things away, it's not always immediately obvious what church it is when you walk in. And I think the size of the icons makes a big difference too. They're very imposing, and it really makes it feel like a proper church. I think that's my kind of impression, and because it is so well fitted to the building, to the tradition, it really feels very much in place, like it belongs. And I think that makes it even more special to have that.
Yeah. But that's the ultimate test, isn't it? That a work of liturgical art, does it enrich people's prayer? Does it enrich worship? Does it give us the sense that worship on earth is participation in heavenly worship.
Especially, there is a lot of icons within it, so that's quite a big difference because we now have so many icons present that we just wouldn't be able to pack away and unpack every time. And this is a very effective way of bringing the whole world to us,
Yeah. Because I know
And I guess
when I
something.
first came to England, soon after I became Orthodox, I was in a parish in Bath. And we were then in the basically using the priest's house. But at other times, we had to set everything up. Later on, we outgrew that. So then we had to set up everything before liturgy, take it down afterwards. And it's really exhausting. I know it's hard enough for priests to do a liturgy, but it's quite exhausting mentally and spiritually, I think. So to know you're going to have to pack everything up afterwards, it's quite a drain. So to know you can walk in and it's all there is really, really helpful, I think, just for the priest and the family or the helpers. So, yeah.
But maybe, Andre, I was thinking, maybe what you could comment on is when we fold it away and when we unfold it, it has an effect, so maybe it'd be nice to hear your impression.
Yes, so I mean, in terms of the iconostasis, when I first saw it, I've already said, it felt like it had always been there. I had never thought, oh, when I first saw it, I was just like, oh, so we just own the place. I didn't even think we were sharing with anybody, which is, I think that's probably one of the highest compliments I can give, really, is that it just looks like it's meant to be there. Yeah, and after being an altar server a couple of times as well, I did notice that I was very impressed by just the actual mechanism itself of how it folds away in this like kind of accordion kind of structure. And even with the uneven tiling, I mean, you can still, because of the fact that it's iron, as you mentioned, you can give it a good push and it's not going to just break, or it's not flimsy. Essentially, it's made well and sturdy. And I think when I first started serving, I noticed that even the Anglicans were like, okay, you've got us here. This is some really nice work. So you don't feel as if like, oh, this is some sort of temporary some temporary stop, like, oh, we've just put this up so that we can have some semblance of here's the laity and here's the priests. You really do feel that there is the Holy of Holies. It really is there. And when you do pray behind this iconostasis, I mean, I was fortunate enough to serve with Father Raphael before he passed away, and you could feel just just this pressure, this presence of divinity was definitely there. It's very awe-inspiring and also very terrifying at the same time, being behind there. But I've found that the iconostasis definitely does help with prayer. Sometimes, if things happen in life, it's very difficult to even go up to the iconostasis because the presence is so it's just so huge. I can't really explain it. It definitely has helped with my prayer life, I would say. When I think about praying at home, if some sort of imagination does pop into my mind, I do often think of the iconostasis at church. So it does feel like it really is a part of just who I am as well in terms of being Orthodox. So those are, I think, some of my gleanings.
That's wonderful. It's interesting you should say that about calling to mind the icons when you're praying and your own images come to mind. That giving my talk yesterday at this Catholic seminary, we're talking about how after Vatican II, for some reason, the Catholics tended to go to white wall minimalism, and some parishes I painted icons for have mainly the older people who are sort of Vatican II children, as it were, said, oh, but these images on the wall might get in the way of our relationship with God. So it made me think about this, and I had to say to them, well, you're going to have images if it's in your imagination or outward. So it's not a matter of whether or not we have images, it's what images you're going to have. So the images of the church have been sanctified by tradition. So we know these images are going to have a good impression on our soul. If you don't have them, you're going to create your own images. And the likelihood is they're not going to be that helpful. They're going to be scattered and have a caricature of what God is like. So I think it's really an interesting point that they're sort of these holy images enter into our inner being, and then they rise from within. At times, particularly when we're struggling, and that the prayer sort of rises from our subconscious, inverted commas, because through osmosis they've got into our inner being.
That's a really nice explanation. I've had people ask, some of the new parishioners sometimes aren't sure about the icons and what they mean and how to treat them. And this is probably one of the best explanations I've heard, how to position that. Yeah, so thank you for that.
Pleasure.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Aidan. We're not going to hold you up much longer. Really, really appreciate your time and the informative, talk. I've learned so much through that, and I've known this iconostasis since the beginning. So, thank you for that. Really, really appreciate it. And Andre, thanks for all the good questions you've prepared as well.
Thank you, Andre. It's lovely to meet you. And God willing, I'll see you in the flesh, and Valentina.
Yeah, hopefully in November, right?
But pray for me, the sinner. Bye-bye.
And for us, yeah. Thank
And
you.
us as well. Thank you very much.